Her brothers claimed every last thing, but they overlooked the carriage house their father had left to her. If you've ever been passed over, underestimated, or written off completely, this one's yours. Hit that subscribe button, because what we're really talking about is finding your own strength, not where people point you, where they forget to look. This isn't just my story. It belongs to anyone who ever had to build a home from pieces someone else discarded. The day I turned 18 was the day I stopped being the state of Illinois' problem. No cake, no celebration, just a cardboard box and a handshake from the woman who'd been my caseworker for 2 years, Ms. Albright. She had this permanent exhaustion in her eyes, the kind you find in people who spend their lives trying to hold back a flood with bare hands. She passed me a large manila envelope, birth certificate, social security card, a final check for $175. That was the severance package for a childhood spent inside the system. "That's it then, Chloe," she said, voice flat. Not cruel, just worn. We stood in the linoleum foyer of the Grayson Group Home for Girls, a building that had reeked of bleach and boiled vegetables every single one of the 730 days I'd spent there. The air had been scrubbed of anything human, same as the girls who rotated through those halls. We learned silence. We learned smallness. We learned not to occupy space. We learned that wanting was dangerous. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, one, underscore, underscore, I managed. The words sat like gravel on my tongue. Thank you for what? The curfew? The mandatory group therapy where every girl lied about her progress? The low-grade hum of knowing you were a file in a drawer, a number on a spreadsheet. But she was a person doing a job, and she'd done more than most. She'd looked at me like I was human. That counted for something. Quote 2. She went on, eyes scanning a clipboard that seemed fused to her hand. Quote 3. I nodded. My fingers tightened around the box handle. Everything I owned fit inside it. 3 changes of clothes, a stack of paperbacks read so many times their spines had split, and one small framed photograph. My father and me at a county fair. He had me up on his shoulders. We were both laughing. That picture was taken a year before he got sick, 2 years before he died. 3 years before my brothers Mark and Stephen sold our family home and told the state there was nobody left willing to care for their 15-year-old sister. Ms. Albright said, I'd already started to turn. She reached into a separate folder on her desk and produced a white business envelope. Crisp, expensive-looking, thick, creamy paper that had no business being in this drab little office. My name, Chloe Easton, typed cleanly across the front. Arrived yesterday, from a law firm. I took it. It had weight to it. Something in my chest seized. A law firm? Every lawyer I'd ever encountered was court-appointed, spoke in jargon, and never once looked me in the eye. Quote 6. She shook her head, expression giving nothing away. Quote 7. That name hit like a fist. 3 years since I'd heard it said out loud. Another world entirely. Sprawling lawns, old money, the place I came from but could no longer claim. The place my brothers still inhabited, like kings in a castle they'd stolen. Bitterness flooded my mouth. Whatever this was, it had to be a mistake, or something worse. One final bureaucratic knife twist from Mark and Stephen, some legal document formally erasing me. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 8, underscore, underscore, I whispered. I slipped the letter into the manila envelope alongside the rest of my life's paperwork. I wouldn't open it here. I refused to let the answer, whatever it was, play out under the pale green walls of the Grayson home. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 9, underscore, underscore, Ms. Albright said, and for the first time something genuinely warm moved across her face. Quote 10. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But when I shouldered that heavy front door open and stepped into the teeth of a Chicago October, toughness was the last thing I felt. I felt transparent. 18 years old, legally an adult. And what did I have to show for it? A cardboard box of clothes, $175, and a one-way bus ticket to a homeless shelter. Wind tore my hair sideways, and I yanked my thin jacket closed with both hands. The bus stop sat 2 blocks away. Every step carried me further from anything I'd ever recognized, out into some enormous, shapeless nothing. I kept one hand pressed against the envelope in my pocket. It was the only unanswered question I had left. The bus reeked of damp wool and diesel. I dropped into a seat beside a filthy window and watched Chicago slide past in a wash of gray concrete and strangers' faces. None of it belonged to me. None of it ever had. For 2 hours, I sat like that, the box balanced on my knees, the manila envelope dragging at my coat pocket like a stone. The shelter wasn't a destination, it was gravity. It was the floor beneath every other floor. I couldn't stand the waiting anymore. My fingers, stiff from cold, trembling from something worse, clawed at the flap of that expensive-looking envelope. I wedged a fingernail beneath the seal and tore it open. The letterhead read, quote, 11. The paper was so heavy it felt like authority all on its own. I unfolded the single page and started reading. Quote 12, it began, formal, frigid. Quote 13, my lungs locked. A codicil, a piece of the will carved out just for me. My father had been sick a long time before he died. His final year was a haze of medication and confusion. Mark and Stephen had handled everything. They'd sat me down once, a brief antiseptic meeting with some lawyer I'd never seen before, and explained that Dad's medical bills had consumed most of the money. The house was being sold to cover what remained. They were sorry, they'd said. Faces like plaster, nothing left. They had sounded so absolute, so finished. I kept reading, my eyes dragging through the dense legal language. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 15, underscore, underscore, the carriage house. The words bounced off my brain before they sank in. I remembered it. Of course I did. A 2-story brick relic at the far edge of the property, half swallowed by a tangle of overgrown maple and oak. The groundskeeper had kept lawnmowers in there, bags of mulch. Upstairs was a cramped, dust-choked apartment nobody had set foot in for 50 years. Crumbling, forgotten, worthless. My brothers got the sprawling 5-bedroom main house, the investment portfolios, the business Dad had built from nothing. And I got the shed. A laugh ripped out of me. Short, sharp, ugly. Of course, this was exactly the kind of cruel joke the universe liked to run on me. A crumb, a last pathetic scrap flung from my brother's table. Probably just for legal cover so they could claim they'd given me something. The rage hit so fast and so hot I nearly gagged on it. They had taken everything. They had let me disappear into the system. 3 years in group homes, 3 years believing I was an orphan with nothing and nobody, and they had known about this. They had to have known. The letter went on. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 16, underscore, underscore, delinquent taxes. No money. Of course not. It wasn't a gift. It was an anchor, a debt. They were handing me a bill. I crushed the letter in my fist, the thick paper fighting back, and pressed my forehead against the cold, rattling glass of the bus window. Tears of frustration and rage scorched the backs of my eyes. I let myself picture them, just for a moment. Mark with that smug, self-satisfied grin. Stephen with those cold, calculating eyes. I could see them planted in our father's leather chairs, sipping his expensive scotch, toasting their own brilliance. They hadn't simply forgotten me. They'd wiped me from the record. And this letter was the final line through my name. I sat like that for a long time, just letting the fury be the only real thing in my body. It beat the emptiness. Anger you can grip. Emptiness just swallows you whole. Then Ms. Albright's voice drifted up from somewhere in my memory. You're tougher than you think. Was I, though? What did tough even look like from here? Surviving the shelter? Scrubbing plates at some dead-end diner? Was that the ceiling on my entire existence? Slowly, I sat up straighter, smoothed the crumpled letter flat against my knee, read it again, slower this time, word by word. Pursuant to your father's directive. Not my brother's, my father. He had written this into his will, done it deliberately, for me. Why? Why leave me a wrecked garage? It didn't add up, unless there was something underneath the surface. A man who'd carried me on his shoulders, who'd taught me to read, who'd called me his little spark plug because I never stopped asking questions. That man wouldn't set up a cruel joke as his final act. Would he? I pulled out the cheap flip phone Ms. Albright had given me, a lifeline loaded with 100 prepaid minutes. Punched in the number printed on the letterhead. A long shot, but I needed to know. A crisp, professional voice picked up. My own voice came out small, shaky. Silence on the other end. I braced for the brush-off. Some paralegal, some voicemail box. Instead, the receptionist said, seconds later, a calm, deep voice filled the line. I said, knuckles white around the phone. Quote 25, quote 26, he said. The sound of my first name, spoken that gently, knocked me sideways. Quote 27, quote 28, I said. The word tasted like ash on my tongue. Another pause on his end. Not dismissive, waited, considered. Mr. Henderson said at last. Quote 31, he continued. Quote 32, fine things. What was that supposed to mean? It sounded like sentimental nonsense, not a legal plan. Find what, exactly? Mr. Henderson replied, his tone even and steady. A hidden key, a cryptic message from a dead man. It felt ripped from the pages of the fantasy novels I'd devoured, not from real life. It was absurd. But it was also the first flicker of something beyond despair I'd felt all day. A thread, one tiny, fragile thread dangling in a world that had felt like a smooth, sealed wall. Quote 35, I managed, voice trembling. Quote 36, quote 37, quote 38. My stomach dropped. $800. Might as well have been $1 million. There was no world where I could scrape that together. Quote 39, quote 40, quote, he said. Quote 41, quote 42, quote. He didn't say it like a threat. He said it like a fact, a deadline, a dare. The bus was rolling into the depot, the end of the line. I stared through the glass at that gray, lifeless station. I could step off this bus right now, walk to the shelter, pretend none of this was real. I could toss that letter in the nearest trash can and let the carriage house, the last remaining thread connecting me to my father, get sold off to some faceless bidder. Or I could do the other thing, the terrifying thing. I could catch the northbound bus, the one heading back toward Barrington Hills, back toward the only thing on this earth that belonged to me. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, I said. The decision was crystallizing inside me, equal parts terror and electricity, like standing at the edge of a cliff and choosing to leap. For what? He asked. For the information, I said. I'll be in touch. I ended the call, grabbed my box, grabbed the envelope, and stepped off the bus. I didn't turn toward the exit that led to the shelter. I walked straight to the ticket counter. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Quote 47 underscore. I asked the woman behind the glass. She looked me over, the cheap jacket, the cardboard box, and something like pity flickered across her face. Quote 48 underscore. I peeled the bills from my envelope, crisp, new, a massive chunk of everything I had in this world. When she slid that ticket under the glass, raw fear hit me like a wall of cold water. This was insane. I was marching back into the lion's den with no plan and almost no money. But for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't drifting. I wasn't being shuffled from one box to another by hands that weren't mine. I was choosing. I was going home, or at least to the broken fragment of home that someone had left behind for me. The ride to Barrington Hills felt like rewinding a clock. Chicago's gray, compressed cityscape loosened into sprawling suburbs, then melted into the manicured green kingdoms of the ultra-rich. Houses swelled, lawns stretched wider. Trees grew older, taller, more dignified. Every mile was a blade, slicing open memories of the life that had been ripped away from me. I used to ride these roads with my father in his beat-up pickup, windows down, classic rock bleeding from the speakers. He'd gesture toward different houses and spin stories about the families inside. Our family had been one of those stories once. Now I was a ghost drifting along the margins. The bus let me off at a small station in the center of town. Quaint, picturesque, charming storefronts and expensive boutiques lining every block. I felt it immediately, that sensation of not belonging. My cardboard box might as well have been a sign around my neck. The Easton estate sat 2 miles from the station. 2 miles I had to walk on foot, like a pilgrim, like a beggar. The memories came fast, thick, relentless. The park where Dad taught me to ride a bike. Knees scraped raw, blood running down my shins, but my face split wide with pride. The little ice cream shop where he'd take me after a good report card. Then I turned onto Oak Haven Lane, and there it was, the house. Bigger and more imposing than anything my memory had stored. My brothers had poured money into it. Fresh white paint, glossy black shutters, landscaping sharp enough to cut yourself on. A brand new black BMW sat in the circular driveway. It looked like a magazine spread, sterile, perfect. Every trace of the slightly chaotic warmth it held when my father was alive had been scrubbed clean. No muddy boots by the door, no half-finished projects cluttering the porch. Their house now, not mine. My destination lay around the side, down a long gravel path so overgrown it barely existed anymore. I shoved through tangled branches and wet leaves. Thorns from wild rose bushes snagged my jacket, dragging against the fabric. Then I saw it. The carriage house sat in its own pocket of neglect, like something the world had agreed to forget. Dark bricks swallowed by creeping ivy, a slate roof bowing in the middle, second-floor windows sealed with plywood, exactly as Mr. Henderson had described, a ruin, a monument to being forgotten. And it was all mine. My hands trembled as I circled around to the back. There it was, the electrical meter, just as he'd said. I reached behind it. Fingertips met cold metal, a small black magnetic box. It clicked free from the surface. Inside, cradled on a bed of crumbling foam, lay a single brass key. Old-fashioned, heavy, ornate. Nothing like the modern keys that fit the main house. This key belonged to another era, my father's era. I drew a long breath and walked to the heavy wooden door on the side of the building. The key slid into the lock with a grinding, reluctant sound. The lock fought me, seized up from years of neglect. I drove my shoulder into the turn, every ounce of force I had. A deep, metallic clunk echoed through the space as the bolt finally gave way. The door groaned inward, swallowing itself into blackness. Smell reached me before sight did. Damp earth, rot. The dense, suffocating breath of time sealed in on itself. A place locked away so long, it had forgotten what air tasted like. I stood at that threshold, pulse slamming against my ribs. Every nerve screamed at me to back away. This was a place where things ended, not where they started. But that key, it was warm against my palm. A promise pressed into metal. He said you always knew how to find... I crossed the threshold. The ground floor matched what memory had stored, only worse. More cluttered, more rotten. The old garage and workshop, exactly where it had always been. Rusted gardening tools sagged against the walls. Stacks of terracotta pots, cracked, coated in dust and cobwebs thick as gauze. Dim light pushed through filthy windows, enough to trace the outlines of two ancient horse stalls from another century. The air hung cold and perfectly still. A tomb. My inheritance was a tomb. Despair came in like a tide I'd felt 100 times before. What was I doing here? This was a mistake, a cruel, senseless joke. The father I remembered, he would never have left me this. Maybe Mark and Stephen had it right. Maybe he'd lost his mind at the end. Maybe he didn't love me the way I needed to believe he did. That thought cut somewhere deep, physical, not abstract. I found the rickety staircase tucked into the corner. It climbed to the second floor, the old apartment. I pressed my foot onto the first step. Wood groaned beneath me but didn't break. One step at a time, slow, careful, my hand dragging along the splintered railing, collecting dust and splinters. The apartment above was 2 rooms and a bathroom barely worth the name. Worse than the garage. Furniture that looked like cast-offs from the main house. A lumpy sofa drowning in faded florals. A kitchen table that wobbled on uneven legs with a single chair beside it. A metal bed frame orange with rust and stripped of any mattress. Dust blanketed everything in equal measure. A dead bird rested on the windowsill like a small, feathered omen. I walked into the main room and let my cardboard box drop. It hit the floor with a thud that bounced off every wall. I stood there, turning a slow circle. This was it, my legacy. A forgotten attic stuffed with other people's discarded things, $800 in taxes. a mountain with no handholds. My week at the Northside shelter already bleeding away hour by hour. Nearly a quarter of my money, gone, spent getting myself to this dead end. I lowered myself onto that filthy sofa without caring what it left on my clothes, hands over my face, and for the first time since walking out of the Grayson group home for girls, I cried. Not loud, not dramatic, quiet and emptied out. I cried for my father, for the little girl who lost him, for the teenager her own brothers threw away, and for the young woman sitting in a collapsing building with nothing ahead of her and nothing behind. Time dissolved. Light through those grimy panes dimmed as afternoon bled toward evening. Cold crept in around me. The tears dried up eventually, leaving only this hollow ache. Scraped out, nothing left. I was so tired. Tired of fighting things that wouldn't stop coming. Tired of hoping for something that never arrived. Tired of reaching and grabbing empty air. I stretched out on the sofa, pulled my thin jacket tight. Maybe I'd just sleep here tonight. Better than a shelter bed, wasn't it? At least here, the failure belonged to me alone. I shifted my weight, and my elbow struck the floor beside the sofa. A strange sound came back. Thump, thump. Not the dense, solid knock of the rest of the boards. Something different. I sat up, my heart caught. I rapped my knuckles against the old wood. Thump, solid. Moved a few inches over. Hollow. A small section, maybe 2 feet square, right alongside the sofa. My fingers traced the boards. They looked identical to every other plank, darkened by decades, cracks packed with grime. But one, right at the edge, had the faintest give when I pressed. I clawed at the seam with my fingernails. Nothing moved. I scanned the room. There, half buried in a pile of junk in the corner, an old tire iron, orange with rust. I grabbed it, heavy, solid, something real in my hand. I went back to that spot, wedged the flat end into the crack, set my weight against it, and leaned. The wood groaned, then it cracked, sharp and sudden, and the boards split free. My pulse hammered so loud it drowned out everything else. I shoved the broken plank aside and stared down into the gap beneath the floor. A shallow cavity, hidden for God knows how long. Sitting inside, wrapped in weathered oilcloth, was a dark green metal box. Military surplus. An old ammo can, dense and solid. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I reached in and hauled it out, heavier than I expected. I set it down and brushed the grime from the lid. No padlock, just 2 heavy-duty latches across the front. I drew a long, unsteady breath, thoughts spinning out in every direction. What was this? What had Dad buried underneath this floor? My fingers fumbled with the latches. They snapped open. 2 sharp metallic clicks that echoed through the silence. I raised the lid. Cash. That was the first thing. Bundles and bundles of it. Not fresh bills from a bank drawer. Old, soft hundreds held together with rubber bands, the kind that had passed through 1,000 hands. It wasn't the kind of fortune Mark and Stephen had walked away with, but it was more money than I'd ever touched in my entire life. I picked up one bundle. The weight of it felt impossible. Tens of thousands of dollars at least. Enough to cover the taxes. Enough to survive for months. Maybe a full year. Enough to begin again. But beneath the cash, something else waited. A large envelope, thick and formal, made from heavy cream-colored paper, identical to the stationery from Henderson and Associates. My name, Chloe, written across the front in Dad's slightly crooked hand, that scrawl I would have recognized anywhere. Beside it, a smaller, heavier envelope stamped with a wax seal, the letter E, our family initial. I pushed the money to one side. The cash was staggering, a miracle I couldn't process. But something deeper than thought told me it wasn't the real inheritance. The real inheritance was folded inside this envelope. This was the answer. This was the why. My fingers trembled as I cracked the wax on the larger envelope and pulled out a thick stack of pages. 20 at least. Everyone covered edge to edge in my father's handwriting. I unfolded the first sheet and started reading. "My dearest Chloe," it began. "My little spark plug. If you are reading this, it means several things. It means you are 18. It means you are strong enough and clever enough to have found this place and this box. And it means I am gone. I am so, so sorry that I had to leave you. There is not a day that goes by as I write this that my heart doesn't break knowing I will not see you grow into the incredible woman I know you will become. The letters swam. Tears blurred everything. I dragged my sleeve across my eyes. I had to keep going. I know you must have so many questions. I know you must be angry and confused. You must feel abandoned. I need you to know, Chloe, that none of it was what it seemed. Leaving you was the hardest thing I have ever had to do, but I did it to protect you. Not from the world, from your brothers. The words hung in the dust-filled air. Protect me. From Mark and Stephen? I loved all my children, the letter continued, but I was not blind. I saw the greed in Mark and Stephen long before I got sick. They saw my business, my house, my money, not as a family legacy, but as a prize to be won. When I got my diagnosis, I knew I didn't have much time. I also knew that if I left you a traditional inheritance, a share of the money or the estate, they would have found a way to take it from you. They would have used their age, their lawyers, their ruthlessness to bleed you dry and leave you with nothing. They would have trapped you in their world of fighting and bitterness, and it would have destroyed your spirit. I could not let that happen. I sank back against the wall, pages quaking in my grip. A horrible clarity was settling over everything. He hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't thrown me away. He had hidden me. So I made a plan, he wrote. A difficult, painful plan. I set up this carriage house in a separate trust, a legal fortress they couldn't touch. I made it look worthless, a piece of junk not worth fighting over. I left the taxes unpaid to make it seem like a liability. I liquidated some assets quietly over time. The cash in this box is that money. It's your start, Chloe. Clean, untraceable, enough to give you freedom. I had to let the state take you in. I had to let you think you had nothing. It was the only way to get you clear of the wreckage when the estate was settled. That was the only way to guarantee your brothers wouldn't come searching. Not for you, not for what was yours. I chose a lawyer I could depend on. My old friend Robert Henderson. I gave him precise instructions. He would be my messenger. Nothing beyond that. The rest had to come from you. I had to believe the smart, curious girl I raised would find her way here eventually. I had to believe you would find this box. I set the letter down. My head was spinning. For 3 years, I'd carried a story of abandonment like a stone in my chest. I had believed my father's illness had wiped me from his memory, that my brother's greed had wiped me from the family entirely. But the truth was so much more layered than that, so much more painful, and so much more saturated with love than anything I could have constructed in my worst or best imagination. He had engineered my time in the system. He had allowed me to suffer, to feel invisible, all of it to keep me safe. That knowledge landed on me like a collapsing wall and an open door at the same time. Crushing weight, profound relief, both at once, neither canceling the other. I cried again. But these tears weren't for me. They were for him, for the impossible choice he'd been forced to make. After a few minutes, I picked the letter back up. There was more. The cash will give you a fresh start, Sparkplug. You can go anywhere, be anyone. You owe this family nothing. But I've left you something else, a choice. Inside the smaller envelope is the real Easton legacy, and it is a heavy one. My eyes moved to the smaller envelope, sealed in wax, dense in my hand. Solid. For the last 2 years of my life, the letter went on, while your brothers were so busy managing my failing business, they were also systematically looting it. Shell corporations, falsified invoices, millions funneled into offshore accounts, all while telling me the company was collapsing under the weight of my medical bills. They were draining me dry, running out the clock until I died. But I wasn't as far gone as they assumed. I found it, Chloe. I found their trail. The small envelope contains everything. Copies of the wire transfers, the fabricated invoices, the names of the shell companies, a ledger documenting every dollar they siphoned. It's all there. Enough evidence to put them both behind bars for a very long time, and to reclaim the entire family fortune through the courts. I stared at that small envelope like it might detonate. Millions. He was talking about millions of dollars. The main house, the business, everything. So this is your choice, my father's letter concluded. underscore underscore quote underscore 61 underscore underscore. The letter slipped from my fingers. The room went silent. Nothing but my own jagged breathing filling the space. The air felt thick, dense with the weight of the decision he had just placed at my feet. Peace or justice. Walk away or wage war. He had handed me a clean beginning and a blade, then told me to choose. For one burning moment, rage flooded everything. White hot. I wanted justice. I wanted to watch the smugness drain from my brothers' faces. I wanted them to lose everything the way I had. I wanted their pristine, manicured world reduced to ash. My fingers found the small envelope, traced the wax seal. I could do it. Walk into the nearest police station and end them. Take back the house, the money, the life that should have been mine all along. But then I thought about what that life would actually look like. Years consumed by depositions and courtrooms. My name, my trauma, scattered across the local news. I would be shackled to them, to their greed and their crimes. For years, maybe longer. I would become the fight against them. That would be my identity. My father's words circled back. It will consume you. He had gone to such extraordinary lengths to cut me free. Would going to war with them just be a different kind of cage? I surveyed the crumbling apartment, every crack and stain visible in the fading light. This was my inheritance, not the cash in that box, not the documents sealed in the envelope. It was this, the authority to shape my own direction. Dad hadn't simply left me money. He'd handed me one final lesson about what freedom actually means. Freedom isn't abundance. It's the power to choose your own road. I sat there for hours while the sun bled out of the sky, the room dissolving into thick, bitter darkness. Two paths bore down on me like a physical weight. I thought about the girl in Grayson Group Home for Girls, the one who taught herself to shrink, to vanish. I thought about the fury that had ridden beside me on that bus like a second passenger. Was that who I wanted to become? Someone whose whole identity was built on what had been taken from her? Or could I be something else entirely? What would you have done? Sit with that for a moment. If you're still here, still listening, it's because something in this story touches a nerve you've been protecting. Have you ever stood at that crossroads? The one between getting even and getting free? That's not a simple question. Drop your answer in the comments. Justice or peace? Your words matter here because this community exists for exactly these impossible conversations. And if this means something to you, please consider subscribing. We're building something rare, a space for stories that don't flinch from the dark. Now, back to that dusty room. Moonlight crept through the windows, laying pale rectangles across the warped floor. And something shifted inside me. The rage drained out like water through a cracked bowl. What replaced it was sadness. Deep, aching sadness. And then something unexpected. Clarity. My father never wanted me to be a fighter. He had no choice but to fight, battling his illness, battling to shield me. What he wanted was for me to be a builder. That envelope full of evidence wasn't a sword he was handing down. It was a weight he was giving me permission to drop. The real gift was never about reclaiming the past. It was about constructing a future with nothing hanging over it. Mark and Stephen had already stolen 3 years from me. I refused to surrender another 60 seconds. My decision crystallized. I would not open the second envelope. I would not contact the police. I would not fire a single shot in their direction. Their crimes and their rotting consciences were prison enough. Let them rattle around that oversized house with their stolen money. They could keep every cent. My inheritance wasn't behind those walls. It was right here, this dusty, abandoned carriage house. A blank page. I slept on the floor that night, jacket balled under my head, the ammo box pressed against my ribs. I hadn't slept that well in years. Dawn woke me. The room was freezing. I didn't care. Purpose hummed through my chest like a current, something I had never once felt before. A small, rusted wood-burning stove sat in the corner. I took the heavy envelope, every shred of evidence against my brothers, and laid it inside the firebox. Then I lifted my father's letter, read it one final time, folded it with care, set it on top. Splinters from the broken floorboard became kindling. I had no matches, But the ammo box held one last secret. Tucked into a tiny pocket in the lid, an old Zippo lighter. Bone dry, but the flint still threw sparks. 3 tries. 4. Then a spark caught the paper's edge. Flame curled around the envelope, then climbed into my father's words. I watched it all go. The anger, the revenge, the past. Smoke and ash spiraled up through the rusted stovepipe and vanished into morning sky. I was free. After that, things began to move. First stop, the county office. My heart hammered the whole walk there. I counted out $800 in cash from the box and slid it across the counter for back taxes. The clerk gave me a long look, but she took the money and stamped my receipt. That fast, the biggest threat evaporated. The carriage house belonged to me. No liens, no claims, no strings. My next move was a phone call to Mr. Henderson. "Ms. Easton," he said, voice steady as bedrock, "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." "I've made my decision, Mr. Henderson." My own voice surprised me how level it sounded. "I'm keeping the carriage house. I want to live here, and I won't be pursuing any further claims against my father's estate." Silence stretched across the line. I could hear him breathing. I'm not sure I was breathing at all. Quote 66, he said at last. Then his voice softened. Quote 67. Tears gathered at the edges of my vision. Quote 68. Quote 69, Mr. Henderson said. Quote 70. And like that, the last thread was cut. My little 1/10 of an acre became its own sovereign territory. The weeks that followed were the most brutal and most beautiful of my entire life. I spent the cash from the box with surgical care, a cheap mattress, a sleeping bag, basic cleaning supplies. Then I threw myself into the enormous work of gutting the carriage house. Bag after bag of trash came out, decades of forgotten junk hauled to the curb. I got on my knees and scrubbed those floors, washed every window, patched the leaking roof with tar from the local hardware store. The owner, a gruff old man named Sal, watched me walk in day after day. Sandpaper, paint, nails. He never once asked what I was doing. But one afternoon, while I stood there turning a plumbing fixture over in my hands, completely lost, he walked over. He grunted, tapping it with one finger. He pressed a new PVC set into my hands. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 73, underscore, underscore. I couldn't form a single word, just nodded. It was the first act of unsolicited kindness a stranger had shown me in years. Bit by bit, the carriage house began its transformation. I rolled warm, creamy white over the grimy walls, sanded the wooden floors, and sealed them until their hidden grain glowed. Found a used armchair at a thrift store for $20 and set it by the window. It wasn't a palace. Small, quirky, still a little broken in places, but every square inch of it belonged to me. I never crossed paths with my brothers. Sometimes I'd catch their expensive cars gliding past the end of the lane. They never turned down the overgrown path. To them, the carriage house remained what it always was, invisible, worthless, a ruin. They had no idea I was living on the edge of their kingdom, and honestly, that suited me fine. I was building my own. One evening, a knock at my door. I went rigid. Nobody ever knocked on my door. I pressed my face to the window. A woman stood on my doorstep holding a casserole dish. Mrs. Gable, my nearest neighbor, from the house across the street. "I can see you've been putting in serious work over here," she said, smiling warmly when I cracked the door. "Figured you could use something hot to eat." I took the dish. Heat soaked through my palms. Chicken and rice. The smell alone nearly buckled my knees. "Thank you," I managed, barely a whisper. "We're happy to see life in the old place again," she said. "Anything you need, just holler." That night I sat at my wobbly kitchen table in my own home and ate a home-cooked meal. And I knew, deep in my bones, I'd made the right choice. My father hadn't just left me a house and some money. He'd left me a community I could choose to step into. Months stacked up, then a full year. The carriage house became a home. I landed a part-time position at the town library. Quiet, peaceful. It fit me like a glove. Every spare hour went into the house, into the small patch of earth outside, planting flowers where only weeds had grown. I guarded my father's money carefully, not a windfall, a foundation, the seed from which an entirely new life was taking root. I thought a lot about what inheritance actually means. I used to believe it was about money, property, the things handed to you. I was wrong. My brothers got the assets, but they inherited the poison, trapped inside a life constructed on a lie, forever glancing over their shoulders. They had the mansion. I had the home. My real inheritance was never the carriage house or the cash. It was the story my father left behind. The understanding that abandonment can be a kind of protection, that loss can arrive disguised as a gift, that the most valuable thing a parent can pass down isn't wealth, it's wisdom. He showed me that true strength has nothing to do with how hard you fight. It's about what you choose to build. He released my grip so I could discover my own footing. The carriage house. It wasn't a ruin anymore. Patched roof, clean windows. The ivy cut back to expose that gorgeous old brick underneath. It stood tall and unapologetic, a monument to second chances, and honestly, a mirror of me. I'd taken something shattered, something the world had written off, and I'd fed it every ounce of love and labor I had. I'd made it whole. And somewhere along the way, I'd done the same thing to myself. Standing at that window now, the one that once cradled a dead bird, I see a small garden pushing up through the soil, alive, defiant. I see a home I constructed, not from an inheritance of wealth, from an inheritance of character. My father handed me a choice. I chose peace. I chose to build. That single decision changed everything. This story, my story, proves something I didn't always believe. Sometimes what looks like an ending is a beginning wearing a disguise. It's about seeing value where nobody else bothers to look, about assembling a future from the scraps other people discard. We don't get to pick what life drops in our lap. We don't choose the family we're born into. We don't choose the losses that gut us. But we choose what to do with what remains. We can let the past own us, or we can lay new foundations with our own scarred hands. So I'm asking you something, and I mean it. Look at your own life. What's your carriage house? What's the overlooked, undervalued, broken thing that might hold the key to your freedom? Tell me in the comments. Fill this space with stories of resilience, stories of hope found in places nobody thought to search. Your story matters, and if mine has meant something to you, subscribe, be part of this. We're all just trying to find our way home. Maybe we can help each other by sharing our maps. Thank you for listening.